Good day, everyone! Your friend once again, Academia Sam, and for today's video, we will be talking about the future test of linguistic relativity and linguistic determinism under Chapter 12, Language, Thought, and Culture. Alright, let's start. Let us first have a review about what linguistic relativity and linguistic determinism is. Linguistic relativity and linguistic determinism, or the so-called Sapir and Whorf hypothesis, is a hypothesis that states that language influences thought rather than the reverse. It claims that people from different cultures think differently because of the difference in their languages. For you guys, do the hypothesis could be true? Does your language influence how you think? Let's just see. From the previous discussion, we saw that the Berlin and Kai color experiments appeared to put doubt on the entire enterprise of linguistic relativity. However, the assertions in the Sapir-Whorf theory are also supported by some experimental evidence. So now, we will look at few experimental findings concerning the hypothesis. John Lucy has examined the hypothesis in several domains other than color. For example, he compared Yucatek is a Mayan language, and American English. The focus of his study has been on the marking of the grammatical category of numbers. For example, the pluralization of nouns. And his study have to answer the question, is there any correspondence between the grammatical treatment of numbers and the cognition of the speakers of Yucatek on the one hand and those of American language on the other? For example, in English, the marking of plural is obligatory for numerous things or nouns. By contrast, speaker of Yucatek mark plural optionally and for a relatively small number of nouns. The two languages also differ fundamentally in the use of numerals. In English, numerals modify noun as in one candle and two baskets. In Yucatek, numerals must be accompanied by a special piece of structure, a classifier that identifies the counted object as to its material properties, as in one long thin wax referring to a candle. In nonverbal experimental tasks, speakers of English and Yucatek were responsive to the number of objects presented to them according on how the objects were treated grammatically in their respective language. So his findings suggest that language patterns do affect cognitive performance. Or in other words, there is good preliminary evidence that diverse language forms bear a relationship to characteristic cognitive responses in speakers. Now, we will look at 3 ways to describe the relationship between language, culture, and thought based on the theories provided by specific proponents. So the arrow sign there means determines, affects, predisposes, or influences depending on how strong a claim one wants to make. But this time I will be just using the concept influences. So present. First, for the linguistic determinism, proponents are Whorf, Sapir, and Lucy. Their claim is that language influences culture and thought. Next, for the universalism, proposed by Chomsky and Pinker, that thought is what influences language, culture, and thought. The thought there means actually referring to
psychobiological
of the mind. And lastly, for the cultural determinism by Weatherspoon and Everett, their claim is that culture influences language and thought. And Another way of stating the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, by the way, it can be also stated in this way that language have categories, and these categories are enclosed in linguistic features. These linguistic features affects cognition and behavior. We have seen that the universal constraints by Berlin and Kay seem so strong. But we've also seen the support experiments of linguistic relativity hypothesis. Now, can these two extremes be united without contradiction? It might be possible. Today, linguistic anthropologists are more sophisticated and most are quite sensitive to such philosophically naive assumptions. So a more nuanced way of viewing the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis does not make the claim that language determines behavior or thought in a simple or reductionist way. What we must consider is where categories and schema that underlie language come from. That is, there is room for culture in the explanation as well, as Witherspoon and Everett remind us. And we must always remember that language, culture, and meaning have inextricably contaminated each other. That's all. I do hope that you've learned something today. This is Academia Sam.